Hi everyone, in this video I'll show you how to do the embroidery for the Maman sweater. At first I'll show you how you can design your own word on the computer or you can do it by hand. Then I'll show you how to use the embroidery paper to transfer the word onto your jumper. And lastly I'll show you what stitch I've used to create this type of lettering here. So I hope this will be helpful, and as with any of the other videos, you can apply this method to any jumper that you've knitted and would like to embroider. I hope this helps. First up, all the things that you need for the embroidery. You'll need some transfer paper that's water dissolvable. I prefer this one from DMC. It's called the Magic Paper and it has a sticky back, so you actually don't need an embroidery hoop to keep the paper in place while you're doing the work. Then you need some embroidery thread. This one is from DMC in the color 453. You'll need an embroidery needle, which has a bigger eyelet, and it would be great if it has a point to it. That makes it easier to get through the paper. And you'll just need some embroidery scissors as well. If you can get hold of the Magic Paper, I definitely recommend you try it. Because it has a sticky back, you actually don't need to use an embroidery hoop. The problem with using an embroidery hoop with knitted fabric is that it can stretch it out and leave a mark, and that would be a real shame if you've put in all the work. So this paper is great because you can draw on your design and then you just peel the back off, stick it on, embroider your design, and you can dissolve it in water later on. I found that this really works the best, but later on I'll mention a different type of paper you could use if you can't get hold of the DMC Magic Paper. Okay, so now let's get on to designing your actual lettering. When it comes to designing your text, you really have two options, I think. First one is to design it on the computer. If you have a program like Pages or Word, you can draw a text box to the specific sizes of how long and high you want your text to be. And you can play around with different fonts, with different sizes. You really have a lot of options to explore and play around with your text, and you can easily print it, cut it out, see what it looks like on your jumper. I think that's the easiest if you ask me, but if you're really great with hand lettering, you could also just draw it out yourself. I'm not the greatest, but I'll show you anyways. If you prefer, you can do it that way. So these are a couple of ways in which you can create your own lettering, and in the next clips I'll show you how to transfer this onto the DMC paper and how to embroider it onto your knitwear. I have transferred my design onto the DMC Magic Paper. The way that I have transferred the lettering onto the paper is literally just by printing it out, then cutting it to size, and now I'm using some washi tape to stick it onto the peel back side of the DMC Magic Paper. And then I held it against the window and traced around the edges using a pencil. You want to be careful to use something like a pencil or a fabric pen that dissolves in water. You don't want to use anything like an ink pen because that will dissolve when you are dissolving it in water later, and that can stain your embroidery thread, which is what happened to me. So yeah, pencil or fabric pen is the way to go. Now I'll just cut this out and then I'll show you how you stick it onto fabric. To stick the paper on, you simply peel back and then put it wherever you would like it to be. And then it sticks to the fabric quite nicely. I should say this sample is knitted in Drops Lima, which is the recommended yarn in the pattern, and it's a wool alpaca mix, so it's not got any loose hairs like mohair would. I'm not sure how the paper would perform on something like that, but on this type of fabric it works quite well. If you cannot get your hands on the DMC Magic Paper, you can use alternative methods of transferring your lettering onto your knitted fabric. This is one water dissolvable film that I have found on Amazon. It's a sort of plasticky film that's not sticky. The only downside is for this you will need an embroidery hoop, which, like I said before, will stretch out your fabric and run the risk of leaving a mark around where you are putting it into the hoop, especially if you're taking a while longer to embroider your lettering on. So I prefer the DMC Magic Paper, but if you cannot get hold of that, there's alternatives out there. Next up, I'll finally show you how to embroider the word Maman onto your sweater. The embroidery stitch that I've used here is called a back stitch. And what you do is you create one stitch, come out a bit further, and go back into your previous stitch, and thereby splitting it. And that's creating this V shape. I found out of all the stitches I've tried, this looked the most consistent. The one thing I would recommend you do is keep the stitch length the same, except for when you're going around curves like these, so tiny, small curves. If you can see here, I've actually made these stitches a lot smaller than, for example, these ones here that I'm doing around a length. And that's giving me a much more consistent design and nicer round curves along here. Okay, I have threaded my embroidery needle, which you can see is quite pointy, and I'm using a darker color than I've shown you before, simply for contrast, to make it easier for you to see everything. At first, I'll show you how the back stitch works on a plain straight stitch. So you come out, you do your first stitch, and then I usually go half the length that I've just done. So I'll come out here. And now you're going back into the stitch that you have just created, and thereby splitting it in half. Can you see that? And that's creating this V shape that you've seen before. There's the V stitch. I'll do it again. So now I'm splitting this stitch here. There you go. And you can start to see how this is splitting the stitches into little V's. And I found that that gives me the most even results throughout the entire lettering. And the nice thing is you have a bit of wiggle room here to maneuver the stitch. I'm using 6 strands, so I'm using all of the thread, just again because I found that that gives me the neatest results. But I would encourage you to practice on your test piece that you've knitted, your gauge swatch, just to make sure that you know what you're doing and you're happy with your results before you commit to doing it on your own jumper that you've knitted. So here you can see a few rows of the V that's created with the back stitch. Okay, so now I'll just show you how I embroider the M and the A for Maman. I'm finding this really hard to show actually, but I have done this first curve here, and now I'm trying to show you this curve here. I'm trying to do a few smaller stitches around the curves just to make it a little bit more smooth. And by going back into the stitch, you can also manipulate how the previous stitch falls to make it a little bit more smooth around corners. So I can sort of split it here now and make that land a bit nicer. There we go. And this one bends a bit too much to the left, so when I go back in, I can split it in half sort of here, and that creates a nicer, smoother curve. So just another small stitch. And then you see how it's sort of missing a little bit here. So I'll just try and encourage the stitch to move over a little bit, grow a little, and move to that side. And when you're at the end of a line, you could leave the last stitch as it is, or you could go back in and split it. So I have just done this stitch here, and I'll just go back into the middle of it to split it from behind. And then go back into where the previous stitch started, just to split it and continue the even look. So I'll continue going around until I'm at the A, and then I'll show you how I do parts of the A. Okay, so I've done the M, and now I'll work my way around the A. And I'm just letting the video run to show you how to do the curves again. To dissolve the paper, you can either dunk it in water fully and it'll just sort of come off, or if you don't want to get the entire garment wet again, because you should do this after blocking, you can just take a washcloth, dip it in water, and then dab it onto the paper, and you'll see how it'll start to come off and dissolve. I found it works just as well as dipping the whole thing in water. So I think that's the entire film dissolved now. And a little tip, if you want to, the paper actually makes the embroidery thread a bit sticky afterwards. What you can do is you can lay the letters or the lettering a little bit right now, and then it'll stick and stay in that way. Because the paper is plasticky, it will actually sort of create a little bit of a harder lettering. So I then usually go around with an embroidery needle and make sure that my rounded edges are nice and round and that nothing looks jagged, and everything lays in the place where it should. So I hope you guys found this video helpful to recreate the Maman lettering, or maybe even your own design, and learn how to do the back stitch on knitwear. And I hope you have fun recreating your own Maman sweater.